In New York, a young Marine vanished from his military base during service. Officials took no responsibility, insisting he had disappeared while off duty and closing the case. But 8 years later, when workers began renovating the old military housing, they discovered something shocking inside the very room where the Marine had lived. A hidden clue in the air conditioning unit that would expose the dark truth about what really happened to him at the camp. The fluorescent lights of Westfield General Hospital's emergency room flickered as Sarah Dalton peeled off her latex gloves. For the last time that day, 10 hours on her feet, 3 cardiac arrests, 1 motorcycle accident, and countless minor injuries later, she was finally done. At 47, she'd been doing this long enough to know when her body had reached its limit. And today was one of those days. The October air hit her face as she pushed through the hospital's automatic doors at 5 p.m. sharp, New Jersey. Autumn's had a particular chill that cut through even the thickest scrubs. Sarah fumbled for her phone as she walked across the parking lot, her white nursing shoes making soft sounds against the asphalt. The screen lit up with several missed calls, all from the same number, Detective Luis Marino. 3 calls in the last 30 minutes. Her heart skipped. In the 8 years since Evan had vanished, Detective Marino had never called her multiple times in a row. Something had changed. Sarah's fingers trembled slightly as she unlocked her Honda Civic and slid into the driver's seat before hitting the call back button. The phone rang twice. "Detective Marino," she said. "Detective, it's Sarah." "Dalton, I'm so sorry I missed your calls. I was in the middle of my shift. Just got out now. Is everything okay? I saw you called several times." There was a pause on the other end. "Mrs. Dalton, no need to apologize. I figured you were working. I tried reaching you about 30 minutes ago." His voice carried that careful tone law enforcement used when delivering significant news. "It's not an emergency per se, but we found something important. I need to show you something that could be a new lead connected to your son's disappearance." Sarah gripped the steering wheel with her free hand. "What is it? What did you find?" "I can't discuss it over the phone, Mrs. Dalton. It's more personal. But we need you to come to the old Marine camp where Evan was stationed. Camp Buckner, near Highland Falls." "Yes, that's the one," Sarah confirmed. "I know it's a 2-hour drive and it's getting late. Would you like an escort?" Sarah glanced at the darkening sky. The exhaustion from her shift weighed on her. But this was about Evan. There was no question. "That would be great, actually. It's been a long day. Officer Vansberg and I can pick you up at your house in 15 minutes. I'll be ready." The drive home was a blur. Sarah's mind raced with possibilities as she navigated the familiar streets of Westfield. What could they have found after all this time? The Marine Corps had been less than helpful 8 years ago, insisting that since Evan had disappeared during his liberty time, his off-duty hours, it wasn't their responsibility. They'd done the bare minimum investigation before washing their hands of it. Sarah barely remembered changing out of her scrubs and into jeans and a sweater. She grabbed her purse, made sure she had her phone charger, and was waiting by the front window when the unmarked police car pulled up. Detective Marino stepped out, still the same stocky build and graying temples, though the lines around his eyes had deepened. His partner, Officer Hans Vansberg, remained in the driver's seat. "Mrs. Dalton," Marino said gently as she locked her front door. "Thank you for coming on such short notice." "Of course," Sarah replied, settling into the back seat. "You said you found something." "We'll explain everything when we get there," Marino said, exchanging a glance. With Vansberg in the rearview mirror, the 2-hour drive felt eternal. They made small talk about the weather, about Sarah's work at the hospital, anything but the elephant in the car. Sarah watched the urban sprawl of New Jersey give way to the more rural landscape of the Hudson Valley. The trees, painted in October oranges and reds during daylight, now appeared as dark silhouettes against the evening sky. When they finally arrived at Camp Buckner, the wind had picked up considerably. The surrounding forest swayed and creaked, creating an almost otherworldly atmosphere. The camp looked exactly as Sarah remembered from her few visits 8 years ago. Imposing brick barracks, chain-link fences, and that particular military orderliness. That made everything feel both permanent and temporary at once. A young Marine was waiting for them at the main entrance. "Corporal Avery James, ma'am," he said, offering a crisp salute to the detectives. "I'll be escorting you to the barracks." They followed him across the compound, their footsteps echoing on the concrete pathways. The corporal led them into one of the larger buildings, up a flight of stairs, and down a long corridor that smelled of floor wax and industrial cleaner. Sarah noticed how quiet it was. Most of the Marines must have been at dinner or evening activities. "This is it," Corporal James said, stopping at a door marked Unit 12B. He produced a key and unlocked it. This unit belonged to Private Dalton and his team. 4 men to a room, standard arrangement. Sarah stepped inside, her eyes immediately taking in the sparse furnishings. 4 beds with military-tight corners, 4 small lockers, a shared desk and a window. Her gaze fixed on the air conditioning unit mounted in the window. It was an older model, the kind with manual controls and wide vents. Someone had placed evidence markers around it. "Ma'am," Corporal James began, his tone becoming more formal, "we're currently renovating several rooms in this section of the barracks. When the workers removed this air conditioning unit to replace it, they found something hidden inside." Detective Marino stepped forward. "Mrs. Dalton, what they found were magazines." "Adult magazines." Sarah's brow furrowed. "I don't understand. What does this have to do with Evan?" The corporal cleared his throat uncomfortably. "They were gay adult magazines, ma'am. And we found some personal items alongside them that clearly belonged to your son." "That's impossible," Sarah said quickly. "Evan wasn't gay. He had female friends in high school." Mrs. Dalton," Detective Marino interrupted gently. "They found Evan's cross pendant, the one you described in your missing persons report, and a pen with his name engraved on it. The items were wrapped with the magazines." Sarah felt her legs weaken slightly. She moved to sit on the nearest bed. Evan's bed, she realized, noting its position directly beside the air conditioning unit. Can I see them?" she asked quietly. "Are you sure?" Moreno asked. "Yes, I need to see them." Vansberg produced an evidence bag containing several magazines. Sarah took them with trembling hands, aware of the uncomfortable silence that had descended on the final room. She flipped through the pages, trying to maintain her composure as a medical professional, even as her maternal heart raced. Then she saw it handwriting in the margins of several pages, little drawings and notes. She knew that handwriting as well as her own, had seen it on countless school papers, birthday cards, letters home. "This is Evan's writing," she whispered. The evidence was undeniable. The pendant, the pen, the handwriting, and the location hidden in the vent right beside his bed, where his roommates wouldn't find them. Sarah closed her eyes. Pieces of a puzzle she'd never wanted to complete suddenly fell into place. The way Evan had always had more female friends than male ones. How he'd never seemed interested when she'd tried to talk to him about a serious relationship with a girl. But also the way he'd insisted, almost too forcefully, that he was attracted to women whenever she gently probed. "He lied to me," she said softly. "All those times I asked him, he said he wasn't gay." As a nurse, Sarah had worked with people from all walks of life. She'd thought of herself as accepting, progressive even. But faced with this evidence about her own son, she felt a complex mix of emotions, surprise, sadness that he'd felt he couldn't tell her, and a strange sense of clarity. The door opened, and a man in a crisp uniform with captain's insignia entered. "I apologize for being late," he said, extending his hand to Sarah. "Captain Charles Vale. I was Evan's commanding officer 8 years ago." Captain Vale was perhaps 45, with salt and pepper hair and the kind of rigid posture that came from decades of military service. His handshake was firm, his expression appropriately somber. "Mrs. Dalton, I want to express how sorry I am about what happened to your son. The Corps did everything we could within our jurisdiction, but since he left during liberty, he trailed off, the implication clear. However, with this new discovery," Vale continued, "we're hoping it might provide new leads for the investigation." Officer Vansberg stepped forward. "We'll need to bag this as evidence, and we'd like to re-interview Evan's roommates if possible. We spoke with them 8 years ago, but in light of this new information, we should also interview other Marines who were close to Evan," Detective Marino added, looking at Captain Vale. "Anyone who might have known about this aspect of his life." The captain and corporal exchanged glances. Outside, thunder rumbled ominously. "Gentlemen, I'm afraid that might have to wait until morning," Captain Vale said. "We're expecting severe weather to move through the Hudson Valley tonight. The roads become treacherous, and we often have closures. It would be safer for everyone if you stayed here at the barracks overnight." Lightning flashed through the window, as if to emphasize his point. "We can arrange the interviews tomorrow morning during the 1,000 hours break," the captain continued. "Mrs. Dalton, we have guest quarters in the female section on the 3rd floor, private room with its own bathroom. You'll be comfortable there." Sarah looked to Detective Marino, who nodded. "Probably for the best, Mrs. Dalton. We can start fresh in the morning." "There's a canteen where you can get dinner," Corporal James added. "The infirmary is on the same floor as your room if you need anything." A female Marine appeared in the doorway, as if summoned. "Private First Class Martinez," she introduced herself. "I'll show you to your quarters, ma'am." As Sarah gathered her purse, Captain Vale addressed the group. "Let's plan to meet in the main hall at 1,000 hours tomorrow. Mrs. Dalton, you're free to walk around the barracks, observe our operations. Sometimes seeing where your son lived and worked can be helpful." Sarah nodded numbly, still processing the revelation about Evan. She followed Private Martinez out of the room, glancing back once at the air conditioning unit that had hidden her son's secret for 8 years. The guest room was sparse but clean. A single bed, a desk, a small bathroom. Military efficiency at its finest. Martinez showed her where the canteen was located and pointed out the infirmary just down the hall. "If you need anything, ma'am, the duty officer is always available," Martinez said before leaving. Sarah sat on the bed, suddenly feeling every one of her 47 years. The exhaustion from her shift, the drive, and the emotional upheaval of the evening crashed over her like a wave. She thought about calling her sister, but what would she say? That Evan had been gay? That he'd hidden it from everyone? That this revelation, while explaining some things, only deepened the mystery of his disappearance? Outside, the storm had arrived in earnest. Rain pelted the windows, and the wind howled through the trees surrounding Camp Buckner. Sarah crawled into the narrow bed. As she lay there listening to the storm, she thought about her son, not the Marine who disappeared 8 years ago, but the boy who'd helped her in the garden, who'd volunteered at the hospital during high school, who'd always been gentle and kind in a way that had worried her when he'd announced his intention to join the Marines. Had the military discovered his secret? Had someone threatened him, or had the pressure of hiding who he was become too much to bear? Tomorrow, she told herself. Tomorrow, maybe I'll get some answers. Sarah closed her eyes, and despite the storm and the circumstances, exhaustion pulled her into a deep, dreamless sleep. Sarah's eyes snapped open at 0530 hours. The military precision of the barracks had somehow invaded her subconscious, waking her well before her usual time. For a moment, the sterile white walls and narrow window confused her. This wasn't her bedroom in Westfield. Then the memories of last night crashed back. The magazines, Evan's handwriting, the revelation that her son had hidden such a fundamental part of himself. She sat up quickly, her nurse's training kicking in as she methodically prepared for the day. The small bathroom's fluorescent light was harsh, highlighting the worry lines that 8 years of not knowing had etched into her face. Sarah splashed cold water on her cheeks, pulled her graying brown hair into a practical ponytail, and dressed. In the jeans and sweater from yesterday, the corridors were already alive with activity when she stepped out of her room. Female Marines passed her in small groups, some offering polite nods, others too focused on their conversations to notice the civilian in their midst. Sarah smiled at them, wondering if any had known Evan, if they'd noticed when he'd stopped. Showing up for morning formation 8 years ago, she descended the concrete stairs, the sound of her civilian shoes soft compared to the rhythmic thud of combat boots. The male housing area on the lower floors was louder, more boisterous. Through open doorways, she caught glimpses of young men in various stages of dress, some making their beds with hospital corners that would have impressed even her strict nursing supervisors, others engaging in the kind of rough teasing that seemed universal among young military men. "Johnson, you call that a properly made rack? My grandmother could bounce a quarter higher than that." "Yeah, well, your grandmother was a Marine, Thompson." Laughter echoed down the hallway, and Sarah found herself wondering, had Evan participated in this kind of banter, or had he been on the outside looking in, his gentle nature making him a target rather than a participant? The morning air outside was crisp, October in the Hudson Valley carrying the promise of winter. She could see Marines in formation on the parade ground, their breath visible in small puffs as they went through physical training. The synchronized movements, the cadence, calls, the sense of purpose, it was impressive and intimidating in equal measure. Standing there watching these young men push their bodies to the limit, Sarah couldn't help but think about how out of place Evan must have felt. Her son had joined the Marines to prove something to himself, to her, to a world that expected certain things from young men. But Evan had never been the alpha masculine type. He'd been the boy who rescued injured birds, who volunteered to read to children at the hospital where she worked, who had a gentle touch and a caring heart. Had he found friends here? The investigation 8 years ago had suggested he was a loner, but surely someone must have known him better. And now, with the revelation about the magazines, a new question burned in her mind. Had Evan found love here? A secret relationship that he'd had to hide? The question swirled as she watched the Marines train, and suddenly Sarah felt an urgent need to speak with Captain Vale before the formal interviews. It was probably inappropriate, he was surely busy with morning training, but something compelled her to try. She made her way back inside and climbed to the second floor, where she'd noticed administrative offices the night before. A female sergeant was just entering the administrative block, her name tag reading SGT, Donna Lee. "Excuse me, Sergeant Lee," Sarah called out. The woman turned, her expression professionally neutral. "Yes, ma'am, I'm Sarah Dalton. I'm here about my son, Private Evan Dalton. I was wondering where I might find Captain Vale's office." Recognition flickered in the sergeant's eyes. "Oh, yes, ma'am. I heard you were here. Captain Vale's office is down this corridor, third door on the right, though I'm not sure if he's in yet." "Thank you," Sarah said, already moving in the indicated direction. "I'll just check." The hallway was quieter here, carpeted instead of concrete, with photos of Marine Corps history lining the walls. Sarah found the door marked Captain Charles Vale, Commanding Officer, and knocked softly. No answer. She knocked again, harder. This time, still nothing. But pressing her ear against the door, she could hear muffled conversation inside. The captain must be in a meeting. She should leave, come back later. But something made her try the handle. The door opened into a dimly lit outer office. The blinds were drawn, casting everything in shadows. Sarah could hear voices more clearly, now coming from what must be a private bathroom attached to the office. "Got to get it in the hole. Push harder." "It's not going in." Strange grunts and sounds followed that made Sarah's cheeks burn. The shower was running, she could hear that clearly. But the conversation, the noises, they sounded distinctly sexual in nature. Sarah stood frozen, her mind racing. Was Captain Vale engaged in activities with someone in his office bathroom at this hour of the morning? The implications were staggering, especially given what she'd learned about Evan last night. A particularly loud grunt from the bathroom startled her into motion. She needed to leave immediately. But in her haste to back out of the office, her purse caught a coat hanger by the door, sending it clattering to the floor. The shower stopped abruptly. "Who's there?" Captain Vale's voice called out. Sarah didn't wait to answer. She slipped out of the office as quietly as possible, pulling the door closed behind her. Her heart was racing as she walked briskly down the corridor, trying to look casual, even as her mind reeled. What had she just witnessed? Or rather, what had she almost witnessed? The captain, who'd seemed so professional and sympathetic last night, engaged in what certainly sounded like sexual activity in his office. With whom? And why did this discovery fill her with such unease, especially in light of Evan's hidden sexuality? Sarah cursed herself for her impropriety, barging into offices, eavesdropping on private moments. But she couldn't shake the feeling that what she'd overheard was somehow significant. The captain held a position of power over these young Marines. If he was engaging in sexual relationships with subordinates, she shook her head, trying to clear it. She was jumping to conclusions. Maybe she'd misinterpreted what she'd heard. Maybe the stress of being here, of learning about Evan's secret, was making her paranoid. Sarah had barely made it 20 feet down the corridor when she heard the office door open behind her. "Mrs. Dalton?" Captain Vale's voice was calm, professional. She froze, her shoulders tensing. Slowly she turned around. The captain stood in his doorway, fully dressed in his working uniform, every button and crease in perfect order. His expression was kind, perhaps even slightly amused. "I believe you were looking for me," he said, gesturing for her to return. Sarah felt heat rise to her cheeks as she walked back toward the office. "Captain, I'm so sorry." "I shouldn't have. Please come in," he interrupted gently, stepping aside to let her enter. The office was now properly lit, the blinds open to let in the morning sun. Everything looked completely normal. A desk with neat stacks of paperwork, photos of Marine Corps ceremonies on the walls, a small American flag in the corner. And standing awkwardly by the bathroom door was a young Marine, probably no more than 20 years old, Mrs. Dalton. "Mrs. Private Caleb Ross," Captain Vale said in a conversational tone. "Private Ross, this is Mrs. Dalton, Private Evan Dalton's mother. She's here with the police to follow up on the recent evidence discovered in Evan's room." He turned to Sarah. "Private Ross was just helping me with a clogged drain in the bathroom. These old buildings, the plumbing is temperamental at best." The young man nodded stiffly. "Ma'am," he said quietly. Sarah noticed he was about the same age as Evan when he disappeared. Had the same lean build, the same kind of youthful face that looked almost too young for the uniform. "Please don't get the wrong idea," the captain continued, a slight smile playing at his lips. "I realize how it must have sounded from outside. We were trying to snake the drain, get it in the hole, as I so eloquently put it. The pipe access in these old bathrooms is terribly designed." Sarah felt her embarrassment deepen. Of course, a clogged drain. The grunting would have been from the physical effort of working in the cramped bathroom space, the running shower, testing to see if the drain was clear. Her mind had immediately jumped to the worst possible conclusion, influenced, no doubt, by last night's revelation about Evan. "I'm mortified," Sarah said. "I knocked several times, and when I heard voices, I thought, I just wanted to check if you were in. I should never have opened the door." "No harm done," Captain Vale assured her. But even as he spoke, Sarah noticed that Private Ross seemed deeply uncomfortable. The young man's eyes darted between the captain and the door, his hands clasped behind his back in a position that looked more like restraint than military bearing. There was something in his expression: fear, anxiety. It was gone before Sarah could properly identify it. The captain seemed to notice Ross's demeanor as well. "Private Ross, you're dismissed. Thank you for your help this morning." "Yes, sir," Ross said quickly. He moved toward the door, pausing briefly to look at Sarah. For just a moment, their eyes met, and Sarah saw something there: a plea, a warning. But then he was gone, the door clicking shut behind him. Captain Vale moved behind his desk, gesturing for Sarah to take a seat in one of the chairs facing it. "Now then, Mrs. Dalton, what can I do for you this morning? I assume you didn't come here just to check on my plumbing issues." Sarah sat down, trying to collect her thoughts. The encounter with Private Ross had unsettled her, but she pushed it aside. "I wanted to ask you about Evan before the formal interviews. I couldn't sleep much last night thinking about what we discovered." "Understandable," the captain said, his expression sympathetic. "I keep wondering about his life here. Was there anyone he was particularly close to, given what we now know about his orientation? I wonder if perhaps he had a relationship, someone who might have known where he was planning to go." Captain Vale leaned back in his chair, seeming to consider her questions carefully. "Your son was different from most of the Marines here, Mrs. Dalton. I don't mean that in a negative way," he added quickly. "But he was gentler, more thoughtful. Not everyone appreciated those qualities in this environment." "Was he bullied?" Sarah asked directly. "I wouldn't say bullied exactly, but he didn't fit the typical mold. You have to understand, Mrs. Dalton, the Marine Corps attracts a certain type of young man: aggressive, competitive, what you might call hyper-masculine. Your son was quiet, kept to himself. Some of the others saw that as weakness." Sarah felt her jaw tighten. "Gentleness isn't weakness, Captain." "I agree completely," Vale said. "And for what it's worth, I personally believed Private Dalton was no less a Marine than any of the others. He completed his training satisfactorily. He followed orders, but socially, he shrugged. He was isolated, a loner, as some might say." "Did you ever notice anyone showing particular interest in him, or him in anyone else?" The captain's expression remained neutral. "I make it a point not to involve myself in the personal lives of my Marines, Mrs. Dalton. What they do in their off hours, who they associate with, that's their business, as long as it doesn't affect unit cohesion or readiness." It was a diplomatic answer, Sarah thought. Perhaps too diplomatic. "But surely you must have noticed something," she pressed. "In light of what we found last night, the magazines, there must have been signs." "I noticed Private Dalton seemed troubled sometimes," the captain admitted. "Lonely, as I said. But many young Marines struggle with homesickness, with the adjustment to military life. I didn't think his case was particularly unusual." Sarah wanted to ask more, to push harder, but something in the captain's tone suggested she'd reached the limit of what he was willing to share, at least in this informal setting. "I see," she said finally. "Well, thank you for your time, Captain. And again, I apologize for this morning's misunderstanding." Captain Vale stood as she did, coming around the desk to escort her to the door. "No apology necessary, Mrs. Dalton. I understand this is a difficult time for you. Why don't you go get some breakfast? The canteen serves from 0600 to 0080. You can watch the Marines training through the windows there. It might give you a better sense of your son's daily life here." "Thank you," Sarah said. As she reached for the door handle, the captain added, "Mrs. Dalton, try not to overthink things. Sometimes the simplest explanations are the correct ones." Sarah nodded and left the office, but as she walked down the corridor, she couldn't shake the feeling that nothing about Evan's disappearance was simple at all. The captain's explanation about the drain made perfect sense. And yet, Private Ross's troubled expression lingered in her mind. The young man had looked genuinely distressed, even frightened. But frightened of what? Or whom? She thought about. Evan, gentle Evan, who had hidden so much of himself. Had he been frightened too? Had he found acceptance here, or had the need to hide his true self become unbearable? The questions followed her as she made her way to the canteen. The morning sun now fully illuminating the corridors of Camp Buckner. The canteen was a utilitarian space, long tables with attached benches, fluorescent lighting that cast everything in harsh relief, and windows that looked out onto the training grounds. A smell of eggs, bacon, and strong coffee filled the air. Officer Hans Vansberg sat alone at a table near the windows. Already halfway through his breakfast, Sarah poured herself a cup of coffee from the self-service station, noting how her hands still trembled slightly from the morning's strange encounter. She joined Hans at his table, grateful for a familiar face. "Morning, Mrs. Dalton," Hans said, looking up from his scrambled eggs. "Sleep okay?" "As well as could be expected," Sarah replied, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. "Have you seen Detective Marino? He's coordinating with base security, setting up the interview room. We're aiming to finish everything before 1300 hours 1 o'clock. Weather's cleared up nicely, so we should be able to get back to Westfield this afternoon." Sarah stared into her coffee. "What if we don't find anything useful? These magazines, they tell us something about Evan I didn't know, but they don't explain why he disappeared." Hans set down his fork, his expression thoughtful. "You mentioned to the captain about bullying." "He was evasive," Sarah said. "But I keep wondering, was Evan targeted because others suspected? Did he have a secret relationship that went wrong? Someone who was jealous? He was only 18 when he vanished." "In my experience," Hans said, leaning back, "no matter how private or quiet someone is, there's always at least one person who knows their secrets. Someone saw something, heard something. We just need to find that person." "I hope you're right," Sarah murmured. "I just want closure. Even if he ran away to escape this place, to live freely somewhere else, I just need to know he's safe." As she spoke, Sarah became aware of eyes on her. Across the canteen, Private Ross sat with a group of other young Marines, but his attention was fixed on her. When she met his gaze, he quickly looked away, suddenly fascinated by his breakfast tray. She thought about mentioning the morning's incident to Hans, but decided against it. What would she say? That she'd walked in on something that might have been inappropriate, but turned out to be plumbing repair? It would sound paranoid. Sarah tried to focus on her coffee, but she could feel Ross's eyes on her again. This time when she looked up, he was already standing. He deposited his tray and headed for the exit, moving with the kind of purposeful stride that suggested he had somewhere specific to be. Through the windows, Sarah watched him head toward the outdoor training area. Then she spotted Captain Vale at the far end of the corridor that connected the canteen to the main building. Ross saw him, too. Sarah could tell by the way the young Marine's body tensed, the way his stride faltered. In one fluid motion, Ross changed direction. Instead of continuing outside, he ducked back into the barracks building and headed for the staircase that led to the male quarters. He was moving fast now, taking the steps 2 at a time. It happened in an instant. Ross's foot caught on something, his own haste perhaps, or a worn spot on the stairs. He pitched forward, arms windmilling uselessly, and tumbled down the entire flight of stairs with a series of sickening thuds. Canteen fell silent. Everyone had heard it, that distinctive sound of a body hitting concrete repeatedly. Sarah's medical training kicked in before conscious thought. She was out of her seat and running, her coffee abandoned on the table. "I'm a nurse," she called out as she reached Ross, who lay crumpled at the bottom of the stairs. He was conscious, trying to sit up. Blood trickled from a gash on his forehead, and she could see scrapes on his forearms where his uniform sleeves had ridden up during the fall. "Don't move," Sarah commanded, her hands already checking for obvious injuries. She palpated his neck gently, checked his pupils. "Can you tell me your name?" "Private." "Private Caleb Ross," he managed. "Good. Do you know where you are?" "Camp Buckner." "The barracks." A crowd had gathered. Sarah was aware of Captain Vale pushing through, his expression unreadable. Hans was there too, and she could see Detective Marino approaching from the administrative area. "No major external injuries," Sarah announced, though she kept her voice low enough that only those nearest could hear. "The head wound is superficial, though it's bleeding quite a bit. Scalp wounds always do." "We should get him to the infirmary," the captain said. His voice was steady, professional, but Sarah noticed how intently he stared at Ross. The young Marine seemed to shrink under that gaze, shifting position slightly, as if trying to move away. "I'll take him," Sarah said firmly. "I've got this." "I can help," Hans offered. "No need," Sarah said, helping Ross to his feet. He was steady enough. She noted with relief no obvious signs of concussion, though the circumstances warranted observation. "You have preparations to make for the interviews. I'll see you at 10 o'clock. Captain Vale cleared his throat. "The infirmary is on the 3rd floor, east wing. Same floor as your quarters, Mrs. Dalton." He added, "I'll make sure the training schedule stays on track," already turning away. There was something in his tone, relief, dismissal. Sarah couldn't quite place it. She supported Ross as they climbed the stairs, moving slowly this time. "Any dizziness, nausea?" "Headache? No, ma'am, I'm okay. Just clumsy." "That wasn't clumsiness," Sarah said quietly. "You were running from something." Ross didn't answer. The infirmary was a small but well-equipped facility. A corpsman with Lance Corporal insignia unlocked the door and helped Ross onto an examination table. "Head laceration from a fall," Sarah explained. "Approximately 2-inch gash on the left temporal region. Some abrasions on both forearms. He's alert and oriented." The corpsman nodded, beginning to gather supplies. "I can take it from here, ma'am." But Ross spoke up suddenly. "Actually, Mrs. Dalton is a nurse and a nurse. I'd prefer if she treated me." The corpsman looked skeptical. "So what? We're perfectly capable." "Please," Ross said, and something in his expression must have communicated itself to the corpsman, who suddenly grinned. "Oh, I get it. You want the mature lady nurse instead of my ugly mug." "Yeah, well, can't say I blame you. It's a rare thing in here." He set the supplies on the counter. "Fine, I'll be back to check on you in a bit." The moment the door closed, the atmosphere in the room changed. Sarah washed her hands methodically, gathering gauze, antiseptic, and bandages. "You wanted to tell me something?" Ross watched her with those 2 young eyes. "This morning, in the captain's office." Sarah's hand stilled. "Yes, we weren't fixing the drain." The words came out in a rush. "What you heard, what you thought you heard, you were right." Sarah sank onto the stool beside the examination table. The captain was. "Yes," Ross's voice was barely a whisper. "And I think he did the same thing to your son." The room seemed to tilt. Sarah forced herself to breathe, to maintain professional composure, even as her maternal heart screamed, "He abused you?" Ross nodded miserably. "Please don't tell anyone. My life could be at stake here." "What do you mean, at stake?" "I'm new here, over a year. When I arrived, I heard rumors about your son. The other Marines, they started bullying me too. Said I was soft, weak like him. The story is about Evan. Some say he's dead. Others say he ran away and is still alive somewhere. Nobody knows for sure." Sarah began cleaning the head wound, needing the familiar motions to steady herself. "Why were you in the captain's office? Why let him do that to you? That wasn't the first time. I've been going there all week, searching for something. Someone mentioned that Evan kept a journal and that the captain took it. I figured if I could find it, I might learn more about how to survive in this place." The truth is, I'm trying to prove to my father that I have what it takes to be a real man. Did you find it? Ross reached behind his back, under his uniform shirt, and produced a small olive green notebook military issue, the kind sold at the base exchange. He held it out to Sarah with trembling hands. You found it? She breathed. Haven't read it yet. Grabbed it this morning when the captain was distracted. Sarah took the journal, its weight both negligible and enormous. Read it to me, please. I need to prepare whatever first aid supplies we might need. A week. Excuse, but her hands were shaking too badly to turn the pages herself. Ross opened the notebook. Evan's handwriting, so familiar it made Sarah's chest tight, filled the pages. September 15th, 1993, Ross read. They won't leave me alone. Johnson and Martinez especially. They found my letter to Amy, the one I was going to send but chickened out. They're saying I'm in denial, that writing love letters to girls won't change what I really am. Sarah worked mechanically, cleaning and bandaging Ross's wounds as he read. The entries painted a picture of escalating harassment. Evan had developed feelings for a female Marine named Amy, had written her letters he'd never sent. When his roommates found them, the bullying intensified. They called him weak, accused him of being in denial about his homosexuality. Is there anything about the captain? Sarah asked, taping down the gauze. Ross flipped forward, closer to the final entries. His face paled. October 3rd, 1993. The captain called me to his office again today. He says he understands me, that he can help. He gave me more of those magazines. I don't want them, but I looked at them. I don't know what's wrong with me. Maybe everyone's right. Maybe I am what they say I am. Sarah tucked the journal inside her own shirt, close to her heart. No one else can see this until I give it to the detective. You understand? Ross nodded. I wanted to help, to testify, but what? I've been going to his office voluntarily, looking for the journal. If I say he abused me, they'll say I wanted it, that I went there willingly. They'll destroy me. Sarah finished bandaging his scraped arms. Then help me another way. Tell me where the captain goes. Anywhere suspicious? Anywhere private? Ross glanced at the door, then back at her. The old gymnasium. It's close down, I think. But I heard rumors that he goes there after each disciplinary review to get some substance. That's what they said. The door opened. The corpsman had returned, checking Sarah's handiwork with professional approval. Not bad for a civilian. You're good to go, Ross. Though next time, maybe watch where you're going. He laughed at his own joke. Yeah, and lay off the older ladies. Ross ignored him, sliding off the examination table. As they left the infirmary together, he whispered urgently, the gymnasium, after disciplinary reviews. That's all I know. They'd barely reached the bottom of the stairs when Corporal James appeared. Mrs. Dalton, the detective and officer are waiting for you in the hall. His tone shifted as he turned to Ross, becoming sharp and authoritative. Private Ross, there will be consequences for missing training. Report to my office now. Sarah watched helplessly as Ross was marched away, his shoulders slumped in defeat. The journal pressed against her ribs, Evan's secrets burning through the fabric. She had evidence now, but evidence of what? Abuse? Murder? Or something even worse? The old gymnasium? Disciplinary reviews. The pieces of a terrible puzzle were falling into place, but Sarah feared what picture they would form when complete. The hall was already bustling with activity when Sarah arrived. Marines were setting up folding chairs in neat rows, arranging a table at the front with recording equipment. Detective Marino and Officer Vansberg stood near the windows, deep in conversation. Sarah approached them carefully, her hand pressed against her side where Evan's journal lay hidden beneath her shirt. Detective officer, I need to speak with you privately. Marino looked up immediately, noting her urgency. Of course. He glanced around the busy room. Let's step into the corner here. They moved to a quiet alcove, partially hidden by a bulletin board covered in Marine Corps notices and regulations. Sarah checked that no one was watching before partially extracting the journal. I need you to read this, she whispered. But not here, not where anyone can see. It's Evan's journal. Where did you get this? Marino asked, his eyes sharpening. Please, just take it. Read it somewhere safe. It explains things about the captain, about what might have happened to Evan. Mrs. Dalton, if you know something, you need to tell us now. There's too much, and we're not safe discussing it here. Sarah glanced around nervously. We're outnumbered. Just please read it before the interviews, trust me. Vansberg leaned in. Could this potentially lead to an escalated situation? Yes. The single word carried the weight of everything she'd learned. Marino made a decision. He slipped the journal inside his jacket and produced something from his pocket, a small flip phone. Keep this. It's already programmed with our numbers. If anything happens, if you feel threatened in any way, call immediately. We'll go read this now, Vansberg added. In our room, you should go back to yours. Lock the door. I will, Sarah lied, already knowing she couldn't simply hide and wait. She left them and walked back through the barracks, her mind racing. The training grounds were emptying as Marines were dismissed from morning drills. She scanned the groups for Ross, for Corporal James, for Captain Vale, but none of them were visible. Lucky if he can sit for a week after this one, a young Marine was saying to his companions as they passed. 4th disciplinary review this week. Ross must be going for some kind of record. Yeah, gymnasium's getting a real workout lately, another laughed. Sarah's blood chilled. The gymnasium. That's where Ross had said the captain went after disciplinary reviews. She spotted it then, a separate building across the training ground. Older than the main barracks, its brick facade weathered and worn. As she watched, she saw Captain Vale approaching it from the far side, his stride purposeful. He didn't notice her, focused on his destination. Sarah made a split-second decision. She waited until the captain had entered the building, then followed, keeping to the tree line that bordered the training ground. The October morning had grown warmer, but she shivered as she approached the gymnasium. The building had high windows, most of them painted over from the inside for privacy. But there was one, partially cracked, that offered a view. Sarah crept closer, using an overgrown hedge for cover, and peered inside. What she saw made her stomach lurch. Ross was there, in the center of what looked like an old basketball court. His shirt was off, and even from this distance, Sarah could see bruises, some fresh, others fading to yellow-green. Corporal James was there too, and as she watched in horror, he drove his fist into Ross's stomach. The young Marine doubled over, and Captain Vale stepped forward. She couldn't hear what he was saying, but his posture was relaxed, almost casual, as if this brutality was routine. Ross tried to straighten up, and James hit him again, this time across the face. Blood sprayed from Ross's nose. Sarah's hand shook as she reached for the phone Marino had given her. But before she could dial, she saw Vale gesture toward a door at the back of the gymnasium, one that seemed to lead downward underground. They were taking Ross somewhere else. She dialed Marino's number with trembling fingers. Mrs. Dalton, he answered on the first ring. I'm at the gymnasium, she whispered. They're beating Ross. The captain and Corporal James. They're taking him underground. There's some kind of door. We've read the journal, Marino said, his voice tight. We've already called for backup FBI and state police. How many people did you see? 3, including Ross, but I don't know if there are others. Stay where you are. Do not approach. Backup is en route, but it'll take time given our location. Hans and I are coming now. Detective, do not go inside, Mrs. Dalton. That's an order. Sarah ended the call and waited, every second feeling like an hour. The gymnasium was silent now, no sign of movement through the windows. Where had they taken Ross? What was down there? Marino and Vansberg arrived within minutes, weapons drawn. "I told you to wait somewhere safe," Marino said. "I'm staying here," Sarah said firmly. The two officers exchanged glances. Then Marino nodded. "Stay outside. If you hear anything that sounds like we're in trouble, run. Get to the main building and raise the alarm." They entered the gymnasium, moving with practiced caution. Sarah pressed herself against the building's wall, straining to hear anything from inside. Minutes passed in tense silence. Then shouts, a crash, the sound of struggle. A group of 4 Marines appeared from around the corner, likely drawn by the noise. "Ma'am, what's going on?" one of them asked. Sarah hesitated. Could she trust them? But then they heard another crash from inside, and the Marines' training kicked in. "Something's wrong," the lead Marine said. "Johnson, Smith, check it out." They entered the gymnasium before Sarah could stop them. She heard one of them call out, "What the hell?" "There's a door here. It goes underground." Unable to stand the uncertainty any longer, Sarah followed them inside. The gymnasium was empty, but the door at the back stood open, revealing stairs descending into darkness. The Marines were already heading down, and Sarah followed, her heart pounding. The stairs led to a heavy metal door, military grade, probably dating back decades. It was ajar, a police baton wedged in to keep it from closing automatically. Smart thinking by Marino or Vansberg. Beyond was a concrete tunnel, the air stale and cold. Old conduits and pipes ran along the ceiling. This was part of the camp's original infrastructure. She realized perhaps an old bomb shelter from the Cold War era. "Ma'am, you shouldn't be here," one of the Marines said, but it was too late to turn back now. They reached another door at the tunnel's end, also open. The sounds of struggle were clearer now. Sarah and the Marines burst through. The scene that greeted them was both horrifying and surreal. It was an underground chamber. Concrete walls lined with cells, actual prison cells with bars. Marino had Captain Vale pressed against one wall, handcuffing him. Vansberg was doing the same with Corporal James. Both military men had clearly tried to fight, but had been overwhelmed. But it was the cells that drew Sarah's attention. In one, Ross sat slumped against the bars, blood still flowing from his nose. And in another, "Oh my God," Sarah breathed. Evan, the figure in the second cell, was barely recognizable as her son, gaunt, bearded, dressed in filthy clothes. He sat on the floor with his knees drawn up to his chest. He looked up at the commotion with hollow eyes that showed no recognition, no hope. "Get them out," one of the Marines shouted. "We need to get them out." "The keys," Vansberg called out, struggling with James. "Check their pockets." 2 Marines ran back up the tunnel. "We'll get tools," one called. "Mrs. Dalton," Vansberg said firmly, "you need to leave now." "Follow those Marines." For once, Sarah obeyed. The sight of Evan alive but broken was too much. She stumbled back through the tunnel with the 2 Marines, emerging into daylight that seemed impossibly bright. Word spread quickly. Marines poured out of the barracks, some running to help, others standing in shocked groups. Sarah noticed movement near the camp's main gate, a group of men in Marine clothes trying to leave in a hurry. She spotted Sergeant Lee nearby. "Sergeant, those Marines, they're trying to escape." Sergeant Lee took one look at the fleeing men and barked orders. "Security, lock down the gate. No one leaves." Marines moved with trained efficiency, blocking the exit. The fleeing men, Sarah counted 6 of them, were quickly detained. In the distance, sirens wailed, multiple sirens. The cavalry was arriving. Sarah stood in the middle of it all, numb with shock. Evan was alive. After 8 years, her son was alive. But in what condition? What had they done to him down there? Police cars and FBI vehicles flooded into the camp. Sarah met them at the gymnasium, leading them to the underground chamber. By the time they arrived, A group of Marines had returned with bolt cutters and crowbars. The cells were open. Marino and Vansberg emerged first, escorting Vale and James. In handcuffs. Both men's faces were carefully blank, giving nothing away. Then came the Marines, supporting Ross between them. He could walk, but barely. And finally, Evan. 2 Marines practically carried him, his legs too weak to support his own weight. In the daylight, he looked even worse, skin pale as paper, hair matted and long, eyes that didn't seem to focus on anything. But he was alive. Sarah's legs gave out. She sank to her knees on the concrete. 8 years of not knowing crashed over her in a wave. He was alive. Sarah pulled herself to her feet as FBI agents and state police swarmed the area. Detective Marino was speaking rapidly to an FBI agent, gesturing toward the gymnasium. We entered the underground chamber and found Captain Vale sexually assaulting Private Ross while Corporal James was recording it, Marino explained. They made a comment about adding to their collection in the disused bomb bunker. Said something about others joining them later. The FBI agent's face darkened. The men trying to flee? Already in custody, a state trooper confirmed. 6 individuals. They'll be taken to the station for questioning. Let's hear what they have to say. Bet they're hiding something. Sarah watched as Captain Vale and Corporal James were formally arrested, their rights read in clear, measured tones. Vale's expression remained unnervingly calm, while James looked like a cornered animal. Both were loaded into separate police vehicles. The medical team had arrived, 2 ambulances with full crews. Sarah moved toward Evan, her hands trembling as she reached out to touch his face. He flinched at first, then seemed to recognize something in her touch. "Evan," she whispered. "It's Mom, you're safe now." He looked at her with those hollow eyes, and she could see him trying to process, trying to understand that this was real. His lips moved, but no sound came out. "Ma'am, we need to get them to the hospital," a paramedic said gently. "Both victims need immediate medical attention." Detective Marino appeared at her elbow. "Mrs. Dalton, that journal, you were right not to trust anyone here. We still don't know how deep this goes, how many were involved or knew and stayed silent, but we'll find out." Around them, FBI agents and military police were organizing the Marines into groups, preparing for mass interviews. The entire camp had become a crime scene. "Go with your son," Marino said. "I'll catch up with you at the hospital later. There's a lot to process here and at the station." "Thank you," Sarah managed, "for believing me, for acting so quickly. Thank you for not giving up," he replied. 8 years, and you never stopped looking." Sarah climbed into the ambulance with Evan and Ross. The 2 young men lay on gurneys, side by side. Ross, despite his injuries, managed to turn his head toward her. "You saved us," he whispered through swollen lips. "Both of us." "You saved yourselves," Sarah said. "By surviving, by not giving up." The ambulance ride was a blur. Of medical terminology she knew by heart, but couldn't process. Blood pressure readings, 4 insertions, preliminary examinations. She held Evan's hand, feeling how thin it was, how fragile. 8 years. He'd been down there for 8 years, at the hospital, not her hospital, but the regional medical center with better facilities. Sarah found herself in the surreal position of being on the other side of the emergency room doors. Her colleagues would understand why she couldn't be involved in treatment. Right now she wasn't a nurse. She was a mother. She sat in the waiting room, the same uncomfortable chair she'd walked past thousands of times without really seeing. How many families had sat here waiting for news? How many had received miracles? How many hadn't? Yesterday, she'd been in her own AL, saving lives with practiced efficiency, each patient a story, a crisis, a human being in need. She'd gone through the motions, professional and detached, never knowing that her own story was about to take such an impossible turn. An hour passed, maybe more. Time moved strangely when you were the one waiting. Mrs. Dalton, a doctor she didn't recognize, stood before her. "I'm Dr. Chun. Your son and Private Ross are stable. We've completed initial examinations and treatments. They're being moved to a room now. We've put them together, as requested. Can I see him?" "Of course." "Room 314. He's awake, but very weak. We'll need to run more tests, but physically, he'll recover. The psychological aspects will take longer." Sarah knew what he wasn't saying. 8 years of captivity, of abuse, of isolation. The body might heal, but the mind... She found room 314 easily. Ross was asleep, bandages covering his face, 4 fluids replacing what violence had taken. And in the next bed, Evan. He was awake, staring at the ceiling. When she entered, his head turned slowly, as if movement itself was something he'd forgotten how to do. "Evan," she said softly. His eyes focused on her, and she saw recognition dawn, real recognition this time, not just the vague awareness from before. His mouth opened, and a sound emerged, cracked, broken, barely a whisper. "Mom!" Sarah crossed to his bed in 2 strides, gathering him carefully in her arms. He was so thin, so fragile, but he was warm and alive and here. They cried together. Silent tears that needed no words. 8 years of fear, of not knowing, of imagined horrors that turned out to be less terrible than the truth. It all poured out in that hospital room. A knock at the door interrupted them. Officer Vansberg entered, looking exhausted. "Mrs. Dalton, sorry to intrude. The detective is still at the camp, but he wanted me to update you." Sarah reluctantly released Evan, though she kept hold of his hand. "What have you learned?" Vansberg glanced at Evan, then back to her. "May I speak freely?" Sarah looked at her son, who gave the slightest nod. "The captain and corporal aren't talking, but some of the other 6 taken into custody are, along with a few we interviewed at the camp, Marines who knew something was wrong but were too afraid to speak up. Your son, when he arrived at Camp Buckner in 1993, he became a target almost immediately. He didn't fit their idea of what a Marine should be, too introverted, too gentle." Sarah felt Evan's hand tighten in hers. "When they found him, writing a letter to a female Marine, Amy Chun, they accused him of being in denial about his sexuality. The bullying escalated. He was called to the captain's office repeatedly for disciplinary reviews. That's when the captain gave him those magazines, apparently to help him accept himself. But he wasn't gay," Sarah said. Softly, "He was just different. The magazines became an issue when other Marines found out about them. They were contraband, valuable in a place like that. Your son hid them, but his roommate found them and made copies. The captain was furious about losing control of the situation. And then?" Sarah asked, though she dreaded the answer. "One night, during a training exercise, your son and several other problem Marines vanished. The others?" Sarah pressed. Vansberg shook his head. "We don't know yet. No one seems to. No, and that's what kept everyone in line. The captain could make people disappear." Sarah looked at her son's hollow face. "Why keep him? Why not just—" "My hypothesis is that the captain and the corporal had certain disturbing interests. They saw your son and Ross as ideal targets, submissive, isolated, with no one likely to ask too many questions." Vansberg's jaw tightened. "They kept them around for their own twisted gratification. But we still need to confirm these suspicions." 8 years, Sarah whispered. "They made him a slave." "Your son will need extensive therapy," Vansberg said gently. "Physical recovery, psychological support. It's a long road, but he's alive, Mrs. Dalton. Against all odds, he survived. I'll notify Ross's family," he added. "They're in Michigan. They'll want to come immediately." After Vansberg left, Sarah sat on the edge of Evan's bed, stroking his matted hair. "It's okay, Mom," Evan whispered, his voice like sandpaper. "I may look like this, but I'm still strong inside." Fresh tears spilled down Sarah's cheeks. How did you stay strong? I kept waiting, he said simply. I knew someone would come. I knew you wouldn't give up on me. Never, Sarah said fiercely. I never gave up. That man I saw in the bunker? Evan whispered, glancing at the other bed. Is he? His name is Private Caleb Ross. The doctor said he's going to be okay. He's the one who found your journal, the one who helped me make sense of everything. He risked everything to uncover the truth. We'll talk to him when you're both feeling better. Evan's eyes fluttered closed, exhaustion claiming him. But there was something like peace on his face, now the first Sarah had seen Dot, as she sat there holding her son's hand. Sarah reflected on the threads that had led to this moment. Ross's bravery in seeking the truth and protecting himself, the detective's relentless determination, even the renovation that had revealed those hidden magazines. Evil thrives in silence and shadows, she realized. It depends on fear, on isolation, on the belief that no one will come looking. But love, a mother's love, a friend's courage, a community's eventual stand against wrongdoing, that was stronger than any darkness. The room was quiet except for the soft beeping of monitors and the breathing of two young men who'd survived the unthinkable. Sarah settled into the chair between their beds, keeping watch. She'd waited 8 years for this moment. She could wait a little longer for whatever came next. If this story touched your heart, don't let it fade into silence. Every missing person is more than a name. They're a life, a memory, a voice that still matters. If you believe stories like this should never be forgotten, please like, share, and subscribe to help keep their memory alive. Together, we honor the lost. Together, we give silence a voice. Because remembering isn't just love, it's justice.